Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Lying in bed next to her husband, Betty kept replaying the events of the previous evening in her head. There she brought the rat poison. Here she took a big basin of stuffing out of the fridge, separated the little spools into bags, and quickly stirred the white powder into it. Then completely inopportune came Molly's neighbor, supposedly to ask for coarse salt. Yeah, how's that? As if Betty didn't realize that Molly came for a reason. Molly was recently slaughtered, which means there's plenty to go around. And she's batting her eyes at me. How much minced meat do you have here? How much good fat beef did you add? Yeah, that's right. And she goes on and on and on. And there's no getting rid of her unless you can get her to shut up and go away. So I had to. Took a rag out of the closet, cut off a scrap of it, as if I'd torn it from my heart. I gave the bitch the hell out of her, listened to another batch of farewell words, and with a sigh of relief closed the door. I went back to the kitchen. Oh my God. The cat got to the bowl of stuffing and was eating it. And smelling that he was noticed, he jumped from the table. The bowl turned over, and it was higher and went straight into a large bowl. What to do? Painfully pondered Betty, looking at the consequences of the cat. Ugh, the old witch cussed, and about herself to her neighbor. Something had to be done. Stuffing was a pity. It was just a little bit of it. Just take a little more of it from here. That's it. I washed the spoon. And it's a pity for the cat, and it's dead. After all, now he's a fool. A good cat was affectionate and caught mice. Great. What's more, he even brought back rats on a regular basis. Cats that were rat catchers were a rarity. It looked like the poison had failed. But Betty was not used to backing down. That was not her nature. She decided to poison her bride, which means she's in trouble. Not only does she not want to work on the farm, she does not want to help her new mother, Betty. She doesn't even want to have a baby. She'll get over it. She wants to live for herself, she says. That's quite an application. All day long she's reading books, supposedly studying from a distance. She paints her long fingernails, but regularly. And you can't force her to peel potatoes with her nails. In short, my daughter-in-law is one disappointment that Betty cooks, so she turns her nose up at it. I can't eat it too greasy. She's throwing her money away. She buys expensive coffee and imported crap you can't even eat. Avocados, kiwis, mangoes. She goes to the city to get them on purpose. I wish she had a car. Her daddy gave it to her, but you can't ask her for a ride to the farm. I don't have time to do anything right now. We know what she's doing. She's been on Facebook all day. Damn her. I told Betty in my day to my son. You shouldn't have gotten involved with the city. She'll ruin you. They don't live on a farm for city folk. Jacob shouldn't have married Cindy. Oh, it was a mistake. How Betty resisted that marriage. What do young people listen to their elders nowadays? They've got a mind of their own. Don't you dare say a word. We'll figure it out on our own, Mother. They'll sort it out. I'll never get any grandchildren, so I just moved some things around in their closet. Oh, what a good girl. And absolutely right to tell her to that arrogant bitch. What are you doing, Cindy, buying such expensive panties? That's Jacob's, and she must have spent half her salary. How dare you, Betty, go through my underwear? Who gave you permission to go through my closet? My daughter-in-law's on a rampage. I don't want you and I discussing my underwear and its price. And why not discuss if the price is so? What makes you think that? Did you get a bill from the store? I don't need a bill, my dear. Do you think you're so smart? Or maybe I don't know how much those lace stripes cost fools like you. But you know, Betty, this is way out of line. Cindy locked herself in her room and slammed the door and almost brought the house down. And then Jacob complained about it, and she put her son and his mother in the middle of it. What a bitch. And it went on like that for days and days. Everyone in the neighborhood knew that we were fighting 24/7. I'm ashamed to go out. She was walking to the supermarket, and a distant relative of Lisa's came up to her and started to ask her questions. Why do you hurt the girl? What girl? I don't understand, Betty first. Don't pretend like you don't know your sister-in-law, Cindy. Are you out of your mind, Lisa? Betty got mad. She never laid a finger on her. Young people, you know what they're like. Think of yourself at their age, Betty. They're young, they want to live. Stop being offended, or something bad will happen. Remember my words. Betty grinned dismissively. You're such a protector. What do you care? She's my high school friend's daughter. You're a bitch, Betty. Looking her straight in the eyes with a serious and even kind of sad expression. Bitch, she repeated. She sighed and moved on. She ruined Betty's mood. Well, after a year of this life, her mother-in-law's patience wore thin. As soon as Jacob goes to work, his wife goes out right away, and she dresses like she's going to a party. Every day she drives her expensive car out of the yard and into town. Only comes home at night. Told my son gently, remembering the previous scandals. Told him gently, sparing him. Your wife goes away every day, and he's so quiet to her. And she's in session now. Have you seen her in session? Oh, I wish I'd told Betty what such sessions are called properly. It's good that I didn't say anything. I realized that talking won't help. We have to act. She packed a traveling bag at home, said she was going into town for 2 days of shopping, slept over at a friend's house, and left early in the morning on the first shuttle bus. She did stop at a friend's house and did some shopping too. But her main goal was quite different. In a familiar place at the city market, she bought Betty Rat Yadu. She always took it here. And the saleswoman had known for 100 years that Betty was being harassed by rats again. She said, Cat, are you a good rat catcher now? Or can't handle it? Oh, he can't handle it. He can't handle it. There's a huge rat on the loose. A cat can't do that. Well then, of course, only poison, nothing else. We talked and parted happy with each other. But the saleswoman did not know that it was not a rat Betty was going to poison this time. And that night, Betty tried to serve a plate of soup to all the guests. Everything as it should be. But with such a table, the wife would need whiskey, said Michael. There will be whiskey for you. I'll get it from the cellar, Betty promised, smiling. He poked his son in the side. How generous. Do you know it is with her? Jacob only shrugged his shoulders in response. Betty kept running around. Betty, what's today's holiday? Her husband asked. Don't you remember? Betty squinted. I don't think so. Today, my darling. 35 years ago we met. Oh my goodness. Michael laughed out loud. Time flies and I don't remember anything. Yes, my dear, you're quite right. You men don't have to remember things like that. You can hardly remember children's birthdays. Betty grinned contemptuously. You're right. Molly, the neighbor who was their guest that night, came forward. You're right, Betty did happen to my late husband. It's a wonderful story. And Molly, with a sigh, went deeper into her own interesting memories. Jacob, why don't we go quietly? Cindy kicked her husband under the table. Now, let's sit a little longer. Cindy sighed heavily and stared at her plate of hated soup. But she couldn't stand that greasy. The food was too colorful for her body, and she couldn't stand it. But what about her mother-in-law for dinner or a holiday? What kind of food does she have? That's all they eat. No wonder everyone is so exorbitantly fat. Even Jacob's sister Kelly is already gaining pounds. One of her husbands is holding out for now, not giving in to family traditions. But nothing, soon they will leave here and live their own life without advice. The daughter-in-law's happy thoughts were interrupted by her mother-in-law's shout. Cindy, if you eat so badly, you will get gastritis. What gastritis? Betty, a nuisance to you, responded Cindy usual, which turns into an ulcer, cheerfully reported mother-in-law. And you, by the way, still have a baby girl. You should not only think of yourself, but of your future children. Cindy said nothing to that. She just squeaked. She took it out, thought to herself, and sighed heavily. Her husband leaned toward her and whispered, Don't you feel well? Why don't you have a couple more? Okay, just for you, said his beloved wife's eyes. Betty noticed everything and smirked faintly. Things were moving along. She wasn't counting on the whole portion, of course. But half should do the trick. The people fed on the soup, and a variety of hors d'oeuvres to go with the whiskey. There was hearty conversation, jokes. Then I wanted to ask for songs, and Molly began to sing. Betty's conscience shuddered, drowned out by anger and alcohol. It stirred unpleasantly inside, But she forcefully suppressed this unnecessary impulse and went to put the kettle on. The rest she remembered poorly for some reason. They sang a lot, drank tea with apple pie, and stayed up late. It got quite dark. Then it seemed like they started to go home, and she could not remember how she did the dishes. Maybe she hadn't. She couldn't remember thinking in the darkness of her bedroom when she got to bed. That's how her husband yelled a bad ditty when he was drunk. I remember it well, a little bit more aloud. Betty got up in disgust, looked at her husband sleeping in a dim strip of light, a street lamp penetrating inside. He looked heavy, the most incredible sounds coming from him. The kitchen was all cleaned up. It was even strange. The cuckoo clock showed. Betty put the kettle on the gas at 3 o'clock in the morning, got a basket of sweets from the cupboard, and sat down at the table to wait for the water to boil. She sat looking out the dark kitchen window. It was quiet, except for the sound of my husband's snoring. The sky somewhere in the distance, illuminated by the distant lights of the track, could be seen in tiny specks over the solid blackness and the yard. A branch from a cherry tree, methodically scraped against the glass, bending in the wind. And suddenly Betty, about a step hid from the table, overturned a stool for a moment. She caught a glimpse of Cindy's white-blue dead face in the window, with her hair parted and her eyes madly and maliciously bulging. She leaned her forehead against the glass, and with her abnormally long, pale, black-clawed hands, rested against the window frame, as if she wanted to squeeze it out and get into the house. Betty's heart hammered in her head at her feet, through her everywhere hot and then cold, and the hair stood up on her head. She wanted to scream, but no scream came out, only a suppressed whisper. "Begone, evil one." The vision obeyed and disappeared. Betty slumped to the floor and with trembling hands searched around for something to cling to. She got up and went to the stove to turn off the kettle, which was shining like a steam locomotive. After all, she was a strong woman. Having recovered a little from the first fright, she pulled herself together, went to get medicine, found Valacordin, poured half a bottle into a shot glass, and drank at once in a gulp. Then sat down, poured some tea, got some jam, drank it properly, and went to the door of the outhouse, to go out into the yard after what I had dreamed. And it was out of the question. At the thin temporary door that hastily covered the entrance to my son's half, stopped, stood, and listened. I heard exactly nothing. Oh, not once or twice. She stood like that at night, trying to sniff out at once what was going on in there. Sometimes it was like music was playing, or the TV was on. Sometimes we laughed, especially if friends came over. But it was never possible to make out conversations. It was annoying. One day she couldn't help herself, opened the cardboard door, as they called it in the house, and woke up inside. But that didn't help either. Young turned on the speaker and the songs drowned out their dialogue. All she could make out was something like, "How much longer? Let's wait. And when we get there, everything will work out, honey." But at the most interesting point, the second door, which led from the hallway to the kitchen, suddenly fell off, and Cindy herself in an outrageously short robe, revealing everything to them. She came out with a cigarette in her hand, followed by her son. "Here I am." Betty cheerfully began to think of something to do. "Now you see," Cindy asked Jacob, looking away, and her voice trembled and she didn't even say hello. As if Betty wasn't standing right in front of her, went back to the annex, and then didn't show up at all for a couple of days. Jacob said she was sick, but it was completely quiet now. It's understandable that it's nighttime, probably asleep. Betty thought suddenly, calmly, as if she had no memory of what she had done the night before. The Corvalol must have worked. She went back to the bedroom. Nothing had changed there. Betty laid down next to her husband again and closed her eyes. Immediately, all sorts of thoughts began to pop into her head. What if she woke up in her sleep from that Jacob, and there was such a thing? What if I didn't put enough poison in the soup, and it wouldn't work, or it would work, but not all the way through? What if they take some tests, and it all comes out? "You should have thought of that earlier, silly," said someone in her head. Betty Stoico, she was chasing away all kinds of bad thoughts. And after a while, she fell asleep. The morning came on its own time, no different from the previous ones. We stoked the stoves, fed the cow, cooked breakfast, ate, drank tea. I can't hear the young ones at all, my father said. Pretty tightens up after the third cup of tea and pie. It's Saturday to sleep it off, Betty said familiarly, examining her ungroomed nails. Maybe Emily could get a manicure too. It suddenly occurred to her out of the blue. Emily was the only manicurist, beautician, and hairdresser in the neighborhood. The nickname Catwoman had stuck with her a long time ago, when she brought her first Scottish cats out of town. At that time, everyone from the neighborhood just turned their fingers on their heads. So much money wasted on some cats. But suddenly, everyone, including Emily herself, her business went on. The cats brought offspring, and then more and more kittens were taken away. Sometimes they even took them from other cities. She adapted to send them by ferry. Business, as they say, went on. By now, she had already had 9 permanent adults. The cats were all the same milk color, with dark brown paws and tails. This came to Betty's mind while she was scrutinizing her nails then. But the background, to keep her head occupied. And the main thing her head cared about wasn't that at all. Betty waited tensely for the moment when something could be heard from the outhouse. The silence was simply intolerable. Why don't they all wake up and show themselves outside? How did they both die out? My husband joked, looking out the window. Betty couldn't bear it anymore. Her nerves were getting the better of her. She went into the outhouse to see what was there. After a couple of minutes, she heard a frantic scream from her husband. "What is it?" Michael came running in. The wife was standing in the middle of the young man's bedroom, tragically rolling her eyes and holding her forehead, her other hand resting on the headboard. "Why did you burst into tears?" Michael asked grudgingly. "Can't you see? I mean, what am I supposed to see? There is no one. What a mess." Michael threw up his hands. "I've got grief. They went out early, and that's that. They didn't tell you. It's all right, we'll get over it." "You don't get it, Betty's on the horn." Michael looked at his wife anxiously, as if he were assessing her mental state, wondering if he should call the paramedics or wait. Betty, realizing he never got to it. She yelled, and she and her things were gone. "Look, the closet is empty. The kitchen is empty too. Gone away from us and didn't even say anything. Oh boy." Michael sat down on the bed, and only now she noticed that the bed had not been made, as usual. So they left. Betty sobbed. "How come we didn't hear it? The car's probably not in the garage either. Though take a look." A further inspection revealed that the car was indeed gone, and the garage was not even locked from the outside. They must have been in such a hurry to leave that they didn't think it was necessary to lock it. In addition, disappeared some of the supplies from the outdoor pantry and all the appliances from the outbuilding, except the washing machine and the TV. The TV also removed. I still hadn't paid extra for it. Having calmed down a little, Betty began to think about the situation. How quickly the poison must have worked, where the young people had gone. What if everything happened on the road? And Jacob at the wheel? Or God forbid, Cindy, because they were both fighting. She wanted to ruin her daughter-in-law, but she ruined her son. Again the inner voice arose. The shaggy chain dog howled along with her, and Betty swayed on the stool and wrapped her arms around herself. Why was the dog howling? Kelly came into the house. "Why are you worried, Mom, seeing your mother so upset?" "Oh, we're in trouble. Kelly, we're in trouble," said Betty, not stopping to howl. "What's the matter?" The daughter shook her mother by the shoulders. "Dad, what's wrong with her?" Jacob left with Cindy, the father said, and seeing the incomprehension in his daughter's eyes, he explained. They packed their things and headed out. And just Kelly smiled. "Come on, Mom, I told you a long time ago it's time for them to have their own house. It's no big deal." "What was wrong with this place?" Betty cried. "What?" And they didn't say a word. They ran away as if from the enemy. "They'll settle down and tell you where they're staying," encouraged my daughter. "Did you know?" Suddenly Betty was angry. No, Kelly didn't answer very confidently, but she guessed. She thought to herself, so that's what Michael said. "Stop crying. No one is dead yet. Kelly, she'll get her right again. Or have you forgotten how you moved out of your mother's house?" The last word was directed at Betty, who, upon hearing the phrase, "No one died yet," she walked in again like she was at a wake. The family dispersed. Time drew closer to dinner. The husband left for the yard, found himself there somewhere. I had to go about my daily chores with a heavy heart, but nothing worked. Things were falling apart. Betty went to her bedroom and lay down with a wet towel on her head. "I'm going to lie here till I'm dead," she thought angrily, wiping away her tears. No one cared. She couldn't sleep, and Betty was immersed in memories. Here were her children, Jacob and Kelly, just babies, running around the yard playing with the cat. Her own mother-in-law, the now deceased grandmother Jenna, was sitting on the windowsill and watching to make sure they didn't do anything or get killed, while Betty herself is a young, healthy girl doing chores. Oh, they worked hard before. Not like this generation. They ain't got no time for it. And she and her husband, they worked on the farm and they worked on their farm. Betty worked all her life as a milkmaid. Her husband worked on a tractor, and in the evenings she had to do the cooking, washing, and ironing at home. It's okay, we got through it all right. We raised our children as grandchildren. God is pleased. Kelly had 2 kids growing up, and Jenna was still upset about something. Didn't wash it right, didn't cook it right, didn't say it right. She'd stand in the middle of the kitchen with her hands out. She would stand in the middle of the kitchen with her hands out to her sides, and the potatoes still wouldn't go bad, would they? Yes, I will, Betty waved it off. She called her mother-in-law, as she should, not unlike the present daughters-in-law. Scolded Jenna, but to bed. I'll see. I can't do anything with my own hands, so at least I'll help you with a word. Your eyesight's bad, too. I know, I just want to boss you around. I wanted to answer Betty, but she restrained herself. She didn't say anything. Not like Cindy. The sad memory was interrupted by a sharp street call. Who could it be? The door was always open. Everyone knew who it was. From all appearances, it appeared that an intruder had come, and the front door was sure to rattle. Michael's voice was heard, and someone else's voice, also male. The door to the bedroom opened. Michael looked inside and said, "Why can't you see in here?" "Do you have a headache?" His wife snarled, getting up from the pillow. "Who's there?" "The policeman's here." Betty jumped out of bed in a panic. "Yes, he's asking for you." "Why?" Betty staggered and the room swam like a fog. Trouble came up. "Come on, you'll see." "Lord, our sins are heavy," muttering to himself and holding his heart. Betty wandered on cotton legs into the kitchen. There was indeed a tall cop sitting there. "Good afternoon." He lifted his cap. "Hello," replied Betty. Actually, on duty to you on such a matter, Betty was silent, frantically gulping for air. Grandma Catney came to the station in the morning. The policeman went on, pulling some papers out of a folder. With a complaint, Catney's complaint. Betty and Michael asked incredulously, "What's that got to do with us?" "Well, yes," the policeman grimaced. Catney, 83 years old, was the meanest bastard in the neighborhood. Always knew everything, and no event could go by without her active participation, or at least discussion. Case in point, the cat came to her last night and died in the middle of the hut, she said. But first, she pardoned me, poured all over the place with some kind of unbearable nastiness. It's written from the victim's words, and he glanced around with a frown. I do not understand something. The owner of the house stared at the police station with amazement. What cat? Apparently your Michael smirked at the policeman. Betty sat lower than the grass, immediately grasping the point. Having said goodbye to the cat in her mind yesterday, she'd never imagined that Canty, and not just anyone, would witness the gruesome death. "Shall we go and see the cat?" said the policeman, standing up. "Where to?" The owners didn't understand. "The cat is still lying there. He's a big striped cat. It seems to be yours. She insists that you clean up the mess and compensate her for the moral damage." What the fuck did Michael swear at? I'm liquidating now. Don't, Michael, Betty suddenly jumped in. Come on, let's go. You know how she is. She'll get anyone, won't she? We've got to go, said the cop, a little embarrassed. Or we'll have to go to the station and get a report. What's the report for? Michael got up. Was it me? Was she sick? if it's established that the cat belonged to them, the owners are responsible for the damage, the police officer explained and added. Don't swear, Uncle Michael. I'm on duty, you know. Let's go. Betty sighed, opened the refrigerator, put the stuffing in the bag. To get Katney and went to get dressed. How was it? When they arrived at the place, did you recognize the cat? Yes, sadly I did. Betty did. My cat. I even cried. Sadly, the couple returned home. Betty was lost and only hoped she hadn't heard about the accident on the highway involving her son. But the day passed, evening came, and no one else disturbed them. It was unusually quiet in the house. Not a sound came from the outhouse. Betty wept bitterly, not knowing what awaited her. For the next week, there was no word from her son and daughter-in-law. From longing, worry, and conscience, Betty had given up completely and came down with a bad cold. Her head cracked, and her whole body ached like a fire. My husband nursed as best he could. My daughter helped a lot at first, but after a couple of days she also had a sick child, and now she rarely came. She was torn between her sick son and her mother. For several days I didn't know what time it was. Whether it was morning or night, she fell into a short, heavy, painful sleep and woke up when she had to. In addition, she was terribly tormented by conscience, shame, and fear. She begged her husband to go to the police to find her son. She said that she was very guilty before him and wanted to ask for forgiveness before he died. But he just shrugged it off, thinking it was a sick delusion. The doctor came and said that there was no danger to life, just a very strong virus. One day, Betty woke up to find a former neighbor and close friend of her daughter at her bedside. She had left the farm a couple of years ago and was now quite urban, but she came often to visit her mother and friends. Aunt Betty rejoiced when her neighbor saw her open her eyes. Hello, Miranda, weakly, smiling, uttered Betty. What are you doing here? Yes, I came to visit my mother. She got sick too. Half of the village fell ill with this virus came to you. I brought gifts. And she pointed to the bundle by the bed on the coffee table. Thank you, my dear, you don't forget us. Betty thanked me. But you are like family to me. Her neighbor smiled and kissed Betty on the cheek. She brought tears to her eyes. Oh, Miranda, we're in trouble. Jacob has gone away and he has not even said anything. We still don't know what happened. Yeah, Kelly told me. I'm sorry to hear that. Thank you, my dear. Why didn't he marry you? Suddenly Betty added, wiping her eyes. Miranda just smiled sadly and remained tactfully silent. Come on, get well, Aunt Betty. Thank you. Betty was very good to Miranda. You could say she was like a second daughter to her. Betty had been friends with Miranda and Nancy's mother since long ago. Their children grew up together. They went swimming together in high school in the winter. Jacob began to look up to Mirandy. They started dating after high school, and it seemed like they were getting married. But then that big city Cindy showed up to make it go away. And how well things were going, right? Miranda was her own girl, a country girl, almost her own, and so obedient and affectionate, always ready to help in everything. Betty wept again. And as now she saw in her memory that long ago evening when Jacob had brought Cindy to meet them, her parents. And he had told her only the day before that he had parted with Miranda and was going to get married. Think about it. All ready to marry someone else's city girl. Betty was shocked. So this bitch comes in and speaks to their son as if he were her own, and to people older than herself and her future husband's parents, and generally looked down on them. Good afternoon. It's nice here, isn't it? And she curves her lips contemptuously. Where can I wash my hands? Right there shows her the Betty corner in the kitchen, where the sink is right there. There is disgust in Cindy's eyes. Where do you get the soap? There's the soap right here, the laundry soap. What else do you need? She looked at me like she was being offered a piece of shit. She pressed her lips and walked away. All right, I'll just use a wet wipe. Then we sat down to dinner. Fried homemade chicken, cabbage patties, and potatoes on the side. I don't need that much. Please, I don't eat that much. Why do you take a figure? Betty laughed. So much fatty food is unhealthy. In any case, replied the bride-to-be and critically looked at the icy figure quite imposing. She also refused to drink her homemade wine. My head would hurt. Hi for tea, she did not even try. At least for the sake of appearance, she would have eaten a slice. Why hurt people like that? When it came to the wedding, Betty asked how many guests she'd be having. Cindy was amazed, her eyes wide open. We'll have a little party after the wedding and that'll be it. I mean without a party. She was amazed, Betty said. What do you mean? It's embarrassing in front of people. We're getting married, not some strangers. Who's more important to you? Jacob said. But the sun was gone, and the city girl was spinning. It went through Betty's head. And so it went. None of the things that had always been done and accepted by the young people liked. Or rather, didn't like Cindy, and Jacob always took her side. Didn't want to get along with her mother-in-law in the same kitchen. Put up an extension with her father in 2 months. With a heavy heart, Betty agreed to it. She even took money out of her book. Her son had his own place. His own section, his own kitchen and bedroom, practically a one-room apartment. So, is the bride unhappy again? Why did they cut through the doors to the house? No autonomy. Anybody can come in at any time. What else could it be? Betty was indignant. What if I have to check the gas boiler when you're away? Do we have to go across the street like strangers? Why not? The dyed bitch answered and looked straight into Betty's eyes with such impudence. No shame, no conscience. And Miranda took a long time to get over her breakup with Jacob. Her mother Nancy told Betty that she cried all night long. The girl couldn't get him out of her mind. True, she came to the wedding and even congratulated the bride and groom like all the other guests. She smiled and danced. And then she went to the city and got away from them. It's understandable to forget. It's not easy to forget love if you're always in front of your eyes. Never got married. She went to college, lived at first in a dormitory, then found a part-time job at a drugstore, and started renting an apartment for 2 people. When she came to the farm, she was always friendly, but she tried not to see Jacob and Cindy too much. I helped my mother as much as I could, and even helped Betty to improve her health. I took her to a homeopath I knew. He's a doctor who cures everything with herbs. I even arranged for him to take a cheaper one and make her head feel better. Really, her blood pressure got better too. I was having a lot of pain. That doctor said it was just nerves, right? Of course, who would doubt it? You need nerves of iron with such events. And with Cindy, every day is like a battlefield. God grant you, Miranda, good health and a good fiancé. 10 sessions with a doctor helped a lot. But he treated me in a very strange way. He put his hands on my head and said I felt sleepy. Then I come to my senses and he gives me a pill and powder to take at home. But it's okay, it helps. As Betty got better, we again went to the homeopath in the city. So I called Miranda to make an appointment. That was their routine. She got ready, told her husband she was leaving, and went to the bus stop. In about 15 minutes, I was on my way downtown, looking out the window at the scenery. It was getting toward winter. How would I know about Jacob? I thought I was still agonizing. With each passing day, the uncertainty was becoming more and more intolerable, and terribly tormented. She also freaked out, seeing the indifferent calm of her husband, who said he would only show up on time. Her daughter knew nothing either, and her brother never wrote to her or called. I wished Cindy's mother would come, Betty thought, but she immediately dismissed the thought as totally unacceptable. How she would look into that mother's eyes suddenly, as if a stone had fallen, the thought pressed her. You are a murderer, a real murderer. You have ruined a living soul. Betty was thrown into a fever, and it was as if she could see for a moment. Terrified of herself and not believing she could have done such a thing. But it passed quickly, and her usual state of indifferent anger returned. And then again, as if I was poured with cold water. Such a panic in my soul, God forbid anyone. I should go to temple. That's what Betty thought. And maybe we should go and see Cindy's mother after the doctor. I'm sure she knows about her daughter. And why, if it all worked out, hadn't the police come yet? The thought stirred Betty again. But again, she managed to push it away and ordered herself to calm down. Strangely enough, she succeeded. Hello, Aunt Betty. A smiling Miranda greeted her at the bus stop as they drove up. It's okay, honey, it's okay. You shouldn't have been so worried. I'll do it myself. Come on, what's there to worry about? Give me the bag. You're still young. You need to take care of your health. You don't have far to carry it. Miranda laughed. I have a car. You bought a car. Betty was surprised. I've been driving for 2 months, Miranda said proudly. They got to the doctor quickly. There were not many people in the waiting room, as usual. But Betty was so accustomed to these procedures that she even started to feel uneasy when she did not arrive for some time. Good afternoon. Opening the door, each time she was struck by the cleanliness and order prevailing in the office and the doctor himself. He did have an unusual appearance. He looked more like a Hindu than anything else. The only thing missing was his bangs. He had dark skin, quick, attentive black eyes, a lean, trim figure, and pictures on the walls to match. Many-armed and many-headed, and some kind of god-like women with blue faces and snakes in their hair. Good afternoon, dear Betty. The doctor responded cheerfully, and not for the first time Betty caught herself at the thought that though his speech was impeccably polite and literate, there was something wrong with it, some slight accent. Well, how do you feel? The doctor asked. Yes, I was very sick. Now it's worse. My head hurts and thoughts are coming back. Thoughts are normal. A normal person cannot do without thoughts, laughed the doctor. The state without thought is called nirvana. Only the select few know how to enter it. But that's not the kind of thought I always have, Betty surrendered. And what, may I ask, are they? Compulsive ones, Betty answered. The doctor thought about it. I can't tell you what they are, honestly, said Betty. Well, that's not a problem. We will now begin the treatment session. And dare I say, I will get rid of most of those most annoying thoughts. The doctor rubbed his hands together contentedly and his head will go away. Betty sighed contentedly and closed her eyes. Soon, she thought, and in the next minute she was already passed out. The fact was that the doctor she went to combined homeopathic treatment methods and hypnotic influence. It is true that Betty herself was hardly fully aware of this. It seemed to her that she just relaxed so much in these sessions that she thought a little and then didn't remember any part of the reception. But her head felt so much better. That was the main and decisive factor. Miranda, my dear, I want to thank you again, she said after a couple of hours sitting in a cafe where Miranda persuaded her to go. The atmosphere was very pleasant. Small tables, all sorts of charms on the walls. The desserts were very good. What wonderful cakes and cocoa oranges I liked, too. I want to learn how to make one at home. How many orange slices do you think they put in there? Or is it juice? I think it's more like orange syrup, Miranda said, leaving the cup of coffee. I see that things are going well for you. You bought a car. Good for you. Does someone help you? Betty asked surreptitiously. Winked. I hope you found someone as good a boyfriend as Jacob. Betty sighed sadly. No, smiled Miranda. I haven't found one and I don't think I will. I took a loan. Oh, stretched out Betty. Credit is hard. It's the only thing I've got to pull out. Well, my mom helps out a little. By the way, Miranda hesitated Betty as if she remembered something. I wanted to ask you, could you find out about our Jacob and Cindy, Cindy's mother? Cindy's mother? Miranda was surprised. I don't even know her. Why are you asking me? Why don't you go and see her yourself? Why indeed? Betty thought. After a little more thought, she came to the conclusion that she did not know any reason why she could not go to Cindy's mother herself. The fact was that after today's visit to the doctor, she had completely and irrevocably forgotten that she had tried to poison her sister-in-law. Miranda, really, I'll go see her myself. Don't pay any attention to my senile nonsense. I said it myself. I don't know what. Forgive me, for God's sake. No, Aunt Betty, Miranda laughed. I have nothing to forgive you for. It's all right. Come on, I'll take you to Cindy's mother. Just the address. Give me the address. Betty had a hard time remembering the house number. She hadn't been there in a long time. And in the best of times, she'd only visited her in-laws twice. Miranda, honey, you don't have to go to all this trouble for me. It's all right. It's practically on my way. You won't be there long. I'm gonna make a little run for it. Then I'll drop you off at the bus station. Betty just looked at Miranda gratefully and thought again if it weren't for Cindy, but for her, it was almost family. Since she was a little girl, has been my sister-in-law. After all, she doesn't give up. And what am I to her? When I think about it, Betty's eyes grew hard, and she almost burst into tears of tenderness and tenderness. Well, here we are, and Miranda stopped the car outside the driveway. Betty got out, waved her hand, and went in the direction of the necessary door. Elevator, 5th floor. Something's beating in my heart. Why would it be? Her heart seemed healthy. There goes her favorite apartment. A holy head. Betty suddenly remembered that she hadn't even called her sister-in-law, hadn't warned her about her visit. What if she wasn't even home? She was on the other side of town, and even Miranda has strained her. But nothing to do is already standing at the door. With a sigh, Betty rang the bell. Silence. She pressed the button again. Again, no effect. Saddened. She staggered back into the elevator. And on the way out, as the automatic doors slid open, she came face to face with Nancy. Oh, Nancy, good afternoon. I was just coming from you. I forgot to call. Can you believe it? Old age is no fun. Betty spoke exaggeratedly fussy and loudly. And you have the nerve to come here. There was such a look of fury on her face that it made Betty shudder. Really? Nancy, what are you doing? It's me, Betty. Why would you do that? Why would I do that? I'm going to call the police. Go away. Where did you come from? And don't you ever come in here again. Betty stared at Nancy in horror, trying to understand why she was being treated this way. Tears came to her eyes. She grabbed Nancy's hand and spoke quickly. Look, I just wanted to know where our young ones are, because they haven't sent a word, not a phone call. It's been a month and a half, and I'm all turned on. Nancy, please, you know. Yes, fuck you. Nancy snatched her bag from her icy palm and literally jumped up, pushed her away. How dare you? After everything you've done. What would have I done? Betty, sobbing, grabbed then for her heart, then for the railing, the stairwell to keep from falling. Nancy, but Nancy had already left on the elevator more, not listening to her shouting. Barely able to keep her feet, Betty walked out of the entryway and slumped on the bench with no strength. Her head was spinning and her heart was racing. It was pounding frantically. She was all rumbled up from the horrible scene. I don't understand it, thought Betty. What was it for? So what had I done wrong? What daughter? What mother? The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. They're both rabid dogs. I just wanted to talk to her like a human being. Oh, it's a hard fate for me. Where are you, my son? Why have you let me hear from you? After all, your mother is going to die of grief. Miranda found her in a terrible state when she arrived 40 minutes later to take her to the station. What had happened? She was worried, hugging Betty by the shoulders. Did someone hurt you? Aunt Betty? Oh, hurt her, and for what? What did I do to her? Betty howled. Her eyes were red with tears. That's what Miranda said. You can't go anywhere in your condition. Let's go to my place, calm down, spend the night, and then we'll see. It will be better in the morning. Betty made no objection. She was in no condition even to think about it. When Betty awoke in the morning, she was not immediately aware of where she was in the small, cozy room, which was so bright and sunny, as if it were April instead of November. Gradually, everything came to mind. And yesterday's terrible scene in Nancy's entryway. And how last night she ended up at Miranda's, drinking medicine tea. Then I think it was the doctor again, or the doctor before that. Betty remembered it vaguely, but what she still did not remember was the story of the soup in her brain, as if an invisible barrier had appeared. She herself, of course, was not aware of it, and only vaguely remembered something bad to her, but so vaguely as if in a dream. And yesterday's events no longer bothered her so much either. They had receded, didn't seem so horrible. So when I came to, Betty heard some voices, yes, coming from the kitchen. Let me think she remembers. Miranda asked doubtfully. Yes, that it was Miranda. Betty had no doubt. Of course she doesn't remember. The muffled voice answered angrily, a strangely familiar male voice. Such strong attitudes could not be circumvented by the average intellect, and if not, if interrupted by a man. Okay, bye. I have to go now. Then they began to speak even more quietly. The front door slammed, and everything went quiet. Betty got up, got dressed, opened the door with the glass, and went out into the corridor. "Good morning." Miranda in a long robe came out of the kitchen with a cup in her hands. "I was going to wake you up. Tea. Or would you prefer a coffee?" "Good morning, my dear. I don't drink coffee. My blood pressure's too high, and the doctor doesn't want it." "All right, I'll wash my face and wait for you for breakfast." "Thank you." And Betty smiled and went to take her morning bath. The little kitchen, too, was very cozy. Lace curtains, cups, nice white garnish, TV on the high fridge, everything new. And Betty liked the bathtub and the tile washer of some unknown model. "You are renting for two with a girlfriend, right?" Betty asked, looking around. "And where did she rent?" said Miranda. "I used to. I rent now. One nice apartment. Expensive, I guess. Her acquaintances only left it to me to pay the utilities and to keep things in order while they were away." "That's great," Betty marveled. "Lucky you. Have you ever thought of going back to the country?" "What if I did?" she asked herself, not knowing why. "No," sighed Miranda. "I have no one to go back to. I'll finish college next year. I'll get a better job. You need to find a good guy to marry." And Betty stroked her hand affectionately. It wouldn't hurt. Miranda grinned, but they don't get many good guys fast enough, and laughed her own unsophisticated joke. "You know, dear," Betty informed her confidentially, "I wish you and Jacob could make it work again. I wish that bitch Cindy would go away. Let him divorce her. He loved you, I know he did, and I think he still does. And she's got him wrapped up. A witch, auntie." Miranda lowered her head. "Don't you have to be like that?" "Yes, yes," spoke Betty fervently. "I pray every day. I pray for them to get divorced. And I haven't had a baby in 3 years. And I want a granddaughter so bad. I wish I had time to babysit. I wish you and Jacob would have beautiful babies." "All right, enough." Miranda got up abruptly and started to put the dishes away. Betty bit her tongue, realizing too late that she had said too much. "Of course, Miranda, it is not pleasant to listen to. It's just to open old wounds." "Forgive me, my dear," she said. "Forgive me, you old fool. What's on my mind is on my tongue." "All right," Aunt Betty said to Miranda. "What's past is past, isn't it? Why don't you tell me what upset you so much yesterday?" Betty was so quiet, listening to how she felt. "And really, why was I so upset yesterday? The usual thing. My mother is as rude as my daughter. Told me all sorts of unpleasant nonsense. I don't remember much of it." Betty waved them both off into the swamp. She didn't say anything about where they might be. Cautiously, Miranda inquired. "No," answered Betty regretfully. "You'll have to wait for her." "What about?" They had breakfast. She and Miranda had tea, and Betty went home. Miranda dropped her off at the bus station, as she had promised. In Chicago, Jacob and Cindy, completely alive and well, against all odds, were arranging their new life. For the first time, they rented a small apartment not in the center, of course, in the suburbs, but they were starting somewhere. The fact is that Jacob finally managed to find a good job here. They have long wanted to get away from the village, from this endless, stagnant swamp, from the hopeless drabness, from the hated Cindy mother-in-law. What had I done to her? She cried at night, complaining to her husband from the beginning disliked. Everything is not the way she wants, and I eat the wrong things. I dress too expensive and provocative. It's me who buys clothes in secondhand, to save us an extra penny. But tell me, where is the justice? Calm down, my love. Jacob hugged her. Everything will be all right. She's just not used to you. You'll see, soon everything will change. But nothing changed, and nothing could change. Cindy could feel the vibe of resentment and hatred coming from her mother-in-law with her whole being. She was a stranger to her from the city and would never be her own. Their way of life was as different as heaven and earth. What kind of friendship or even normal coexistence was there? No, Cindy has not cheated at all on this point, as long as she and Jacob live, with his parents under the same roof. Their marriage is in danger. Her own mother was quite right when she warned that nothing good would come of living together with her husband's parents. She should have left right after the wedding. Or better yet, no wedding at all. Who needs these silly ceremonies now? The dress? A crowd of guests, most of whom you see for the first and probably last time in your life, all curious, greedy, insolent looks of them, vulgar jokes, drunken shouts, and obscene songs. Cindy shuddered at the thought of what it might have been like. Thank God that nightmare had been avoided. She had seen enough of such things at her friends' weddings. But here in this gray backward village stuck in the last century, all this takes a truly monstrous hypertrophied forms, and the endless filth, and like water in the house held and even equipped with a warm bathroom. But everything is something unfinished. Rusty pipes outside the bathroom, peeling walls with mold, and in the kitchen is not better. The yard is better to be silent. Junkyard of unnecessary waste, pits, potholes, and impassable dirt. Do they really like to live like that? That's why she insisted on an extension. It's tiny, but it's her own. So she wouldn't have to meet her mother-in-law in the same bathroom every day. But even that didn't help. She pestered her endlessly every single day, for every insignificant reason. Oh, you're not up yet. It's time to make a displeased face, and it's okay that it's Saturday. People want to sleep in sometimes too, and you're going to feed Jacob with that. There's nightmare and disgust in your eyes. It's a normal fish soup, tom yum. Jacob likes it very much not greasy like all their horrible borsches, hodgepodge, and dumplings. The diet soup and avocado salad are great. But she's still itching for it. She's poking her head in every hole. In the end, Cindy just couldn't take it anymore. She made Jacob a condition. Either he does something to get them out of here, or they get a divorce. This decision was very difficult for her. There's no telling what she would have done if he had chosen divorce. After all, she loved him so much. But Jacob also loved her for real, so he began to look for work in Detroit or in Chicago remotely. For months, there were no worthwhile offers. And understandably, it wasn't easy. Just out of college, finding a decent job, but then luck smiled on them. A job was found in Chicago, and the pay wasn't bad to begin with. It is necessary to leave, and as soon as possible. The employer would not wait. She was in a great mood that day when she met her mother-in-law at the big house. She decided that since they were leaving soon, she might as well try to make one last positive contribution. Then, when they were gone, Jacob would miss her anyway. Parents are home after all, even if they are. It disgusts her. And he grew up here. Childhood memories are the best. In short, she came with goodness, brought a box of chocolates. Got together with my mother-in-law to drink tea, talk normally, talk about the upcoming departure so immediately, of course, did not plan. Then later, together with Jacob, but for now, just a little relationship building. Good afternoon. I brought my mother-in-law for tea. I looked at her critically like a general before a battle. What's today's holiday? What holiday? There's no holiday, Cindy smiled. I'll just put the kettle on. My mother-in-law graciously agreed, sinking into an armchair in front of the television. He never turned the TV off halfway. When I turn it on in the morning, it growls all day long. Stupid soap operas, endless talk shows, etc. Brainwashing was the background to the whole life of these elderly people. Even if guests came over, if they talked about something, they didn't even announce the sound. Cindy was amazed more than once. Why? Didn't it bother her? But apparently it didn't. A habit of many years. It made her shudder to think about it. But they were fine. The kettle boiled, and Cindy opened the cabinet where there was a brew to make some fresh tea. Why do you want to go back to sleep? Betty looked up. There's still good brew, just poured last night. Another habit that Cindy never got over. The tea here has been infused for 24 hours. The old brew was simply poured over dry, and that was it. It was a horrible mess. You could get poisoned. Honestly, all right. She obediently agreed. I'll take a bag of it. Okay, my mother-in-law just grudgingly shook her lips. A large set of tea bags were given by the children. They used it when they came to visit. You see, they don't like Betty's tea all their lives and nothing. And now I don't like it anymore. The main thing was that her daughter Kelly got hit. Now she didn't drink Betty's tea. It's terrible what's going on. Soon they're gonna drive her out of the world. They sat down to tea. The TV mumbled something mundane. Cindy didn't go into much detail. My mother-in-law was silent. She waited to hear what Cindy had to say. She had to say something, but she couldn't sit in silence. What did the daughter-in-law point to the plastic basin with the green balls next to the chair, or on the spokes? Something was starting to get motley. Socks, winter socks warm. My mother-in-law smiled at everyone on New Year's Eve. For the first time since Cindy came. That's great. It's beautiful. Do you like it? Betty said it was nice. I'll knit you one too. I'll knit you some little ones. She sighed and looked at Cindy expressively. She looked at Cindy, saying, "When am I going to have grandchildren?" Cindy could take a hint like that with half a glance. She was pecking her brains out with her hints. That's where the baby was going. But she said it out loud and tied it up, of course. Yes, sighed her mother-in-law. And when did you make me and my grandchildren happy? All in good time, Cindy smiled, determined not to give up her optimistic position. Time, Betty suddenly said. Exactly, time, time and time. My dear, will not wait. I've already had 2 babies at your age. And you only want to have a good time? You think only of yourself. We won't get grandchildren from you. Maybe you can't even give birth. Then suddenly your mother-in-law's been married for 3 years. It's about time. It's time. Everyone has his own firm but calm answer, Cindy. Does Jacob know? My mother-in-law won't let up. He knows about your problems. I said, what makes you think I have a problem? Finally, Cindy couldn't take it anymore and she got indignant. What right do you have to pry into someone else's life? Into someone else's life, squealed her mother-in-law, getting up from her chair and hovering over the seated Cindy with her entire bulk. You say it's someone else's life. It's my son's life, my own son's life. You'll have children, if you have any. Then you'll know how a mother's heart hurts. You are the stranger here. Until you give birth, you won't be yours. And you can't give birth. Just say so. And don't make a spectacle of yourself. I think that's what Cindy said when she got up too. You're the one who's making a spectacle here. She went away to her annex. There she collapsed on her bed, sobbing. In the evening, when Jacob arrived, he found his wife in a state of utter distress. Have we quarreled again? He asked tiredly. Yes, Cindy shouted hysterically. I came to her for good, and tears again. Then she told him everything. He felt sorry for her again. Everything as usual. Lord, I wish I could go away soon. He only had a week left to work at his old place. And this Saturday they'll be away, finally away from here. After calming down, Cindy decided to take a walk. There was only one route to walk from the store to the bus stop. That's all the infrastructure. I got there, took a little walk. I bought some small things and in the doorway, I bumped into my mom's friend with Lisa. She and Jacob actually met. Thanks to her, she and her mother came to visit her on her anniversary. Cindy cheered at the wall. Why have you come in, dear? I was just about to stop by. Cindy smiled. You were. I bought some marshmallows for my tea, and I'm going to town. Lisa was upset. Well, come along, I'll tell you. It won't take long, really. They left the store and went to the bus stop. Here Cindy told the woman about everything about her departure and about her last quarrel with her mother-in-law. Why is she like that, and pitifully with tears in her eyes? Asked Cindy. After all, I am not doing her any harm. Oh, my dear. I was saddened and thought, you were right to leave Jacob. No good will come of such a life. Betty has always been dopey, to tell you the truth. It's progressed to old age, and she laughed mirthlessly. And you know, thoughtfully, Lisa added, I didn't want to tell you, but I should probably warn you. I don't know. I don't feel good about myself. What's the matter? Cindy was surprised. Molly, the famous gossipy, came to see me yesterday. But she said some terrible things. I didn't pay any attention at first. I thought it was nothing. But now I think it may not be nothing. What is it? Cindy suddenly felt a chill run down her legs. Goosebumps crawled up her back, and it was hard to breathe. Come on, let's sit down. No one seemed to be around. Well, listen to me carefully, dear. I hope you won't need it. But listen to me. Lisa resolutely said Molly the other day saw Betty stir poison into the dumplings poison. Cindy felt a real shock. What poison? Smiling stupidly, she asked. What for? I don't know exactly. Mall says rat poison. Allegedly saw through the kitchen window a package of red poison. How Betty opened it and poured it into the stuffing. I really hope this is all nonsense, but please be careful. Lisa hugged Cindy tightly. That same evening, Cindy was determined that she would not eat anything at her mother-in-law's. Nothing at all. Out of harm's way, as the saying goes. So when it came to dumplings, tricked her vigilance, took small and sturdy bags, and pretended to eat, discreetly threw everything in a bag. The crowd was full. It turned out not to be as difficult as it seemed at first. It was true that Jacob, sitting next to me, was very disturbing, but he did occasionally turn away, eating, drinking, talking. Cindy was deathly afraid, and for him too, not just for herself. But she didn't tell him anything at the time. She knew they wouldn't believe her, and it would only make things worse. And there was no proof. And her mother-in-law, knowing her appetite and her fatty food, suspected nothing. Finally, this ghastly dinner came to an end, and it was safe to leave. Cindy did not throw the dumplings away, but took them with her, carefully wrapped in several layers of foil, and put them in a thermos of ice. Early in the morning, while my mother-in-law and father-in-law were asleep after last night's outing, they left. Cindy firmly insisted on not saying goodbye to her parents and not saying anything in advance. She said she wouldn't survive another scandal. We'll get there and call. All right, Jacob grudgingly agreed. But why all the secrecy? You see, if I tell you now, your mother will drive me crazy and won't let us leave. I know that for a fact, and I can't be worried right now because she said something in his ear too. Really, why didn't you say that before, beloved? Jacob hugged his wife gently. I wasn't sure. I only found out the other day. That's how it was decided. We packed up and left in secret. Didn't say a word. Did the mother feel anything, though? Jacob sighed as he drove the car down the highway. That's Uck. We'll tell you soon. I hope they will be happy for us. Of course, such news. And he looked fondly at his wife again. The first thing to do was to take a little break from the road. Cindy went to the Bureau of Chemical Analysis and gave the unfortunate dumplings for analysis. When she heard the result, she was not particularly surprised, because she was prepared. But Jacob, after learning everything and seeing the results with his own eyes, was in a state of shock. What they went through cannot be described in words. Of course, no one called his parents. In light of recent events, Cindy's husband did not want to hear about his mother at all. He even wanted to go to the police, write a report, and even went to consult with a lawyer. But he talked him out of it, saying that there was no crime and that you don't go to jail for intent. But she almost died. Jacob got hot and bothered. Not as far as the law is concerned, calmly answered the lawyer. But if she had eaten, poisoned herself, but survived, then yes, she almost died. But I prevented the possible consequences in time. You can, of course, beat your mother's nerves. You can write a statement, but it's just unnecessary stress, believe me. What should we do? Jacob put his arms around his head. Would you like some advice? Not legal advice, but purely human advice. Yes, please. Just move on with your life. Don't talk to your parents and try to forget it all as a bad dream. But they'll find us. Unless I'm wrong, and I'm very rarely wrong, I don't think your mother will come looking for you. You're probably right, Jacob agreed. And so we parted. But the experienced lawyer was wrong. After all, he did not know all the facts and circumstances of this confusing case. Betty remembered absolutely nothing of his crime. In the end, began to look for them, and quite actively. Right when she returned from town, she went to the police and demanded that her son be found. Soon it was 2 months since they got away. That's right. My daughter-in-law must be the one who took her own son away from us. Haven't they written or called you yet? No. That's right. I haven't heard anything. Betty was sobbing violently and dying in her handkerchief. You insist on searching, but there were no life-threatening circumstances when you left. Go ahead and search. That's your job. You never know what could have happened to them. There's no way a native son could not tell his parents about himself. Just like that, he left and disappeared without a trace. The precinct had to make a case. Michael and Betty wrote a statement. Everyone, as they should have, put out an APB to all the posts in the regional center. They interviewed anyone and everyone who was present at the last dinner before the young people left. The police went around and talked to everyone. The picture was not a happy one. About 2 weeks after Betty arrived at the station, the street bell rang again, and Betty saw the policeman and some other man with him. A handsome man with a mustache. Serious. In a Betty and Michael Brown's uniform. He threw his words sharply, as if he were throwing stones. Yes, the spouses responded. That's right. Allow me to introduce myself. Internal Affairs Major Kurt Green. Have you made inquiries into the report of the disappearance of your son Jacob? The man in uniform reported officially. And what's with the tearing? Betty asked. She felt uncomfortable with such formal language. She thought she was in trouble. As a result of the investigation, we found out the circumstances that indicate your guilt, said the mustachioed major, looking at Betty point blank. My guilt, the official was astonished, interrupting him. And what, may I ask, is my fault? My son is missing. Or don't you know? In view of the above, I inform you that there is a warrant for your arrest. The major continued nonchalantly, ignoring the leader of the speech, which Betty laughed pretentiously and blushed all over. You've all gone completely out of your minds. You're supposed to follow me to the detention center. Kurt was making a point. You can pack up and take what you need. Please sign here. Fuck all of you. Betty said, sitting down on the stool. I'm not going anywhere. This is some kind of silly practical joke. You are charged with intentionally causing injury to the life and health of your sister-in-law, Citizen Cindy. This is insane, Michael, breathing heavily and holding his heart. Slowly sat down on the stool. Mother, do you understand what they are saying? Of course not, Betty said. It's idiotic. Our son is missing, and they're making a circus out of it. In case of non-compliance with the orders of the officer, I have an instruction to take you into custody by force. The major announced almost confidentially and waved his hand into the room. As if waiting for the signal, 2 tall men in the same uniform entered. Betty sat up and only gulped air convulsively. The whole village fled from watching Betty being taken away in a police squad car with bars. Look what's going on. What on earth is going on? I knew it. I knew it wasn't for nothing that Katney, standing in the front row, wagged an ominous finger at the scientist. And their cat was dead. And he was getting sick all over the place. It was impossible to breathe for a week, and only Molly. And was not in that curious crowd. The investigation lasted several months. During that time, the entire county, all the way to the regional center, was aware of the events. And the village was buzzing like a beehive. The rumors were unbelievable. Betty had poisoned her daughter-in-law to death. She'd been buried in town and was about to be exhumed. The body had been dug up long ago and taken to Detroit for examination. And Cindy was pregnant. Did you hear that? That's bullshit. She didn't poison anybody. She accidentally put rat poison in the stuffing. It was the cat's fault. He came into the kitchen at the wrong time and spat stuffing right into the bowl. And Betty didn't even notice. The cat didn't spit anywhere. It was the devil's work. It was an accident. I did get it in, but there was stuffing and rat poison mixed in with the poison. There wasn't much room to turn around. It's a small kitchen. Come on, it wasn't Betty who poisoned my sister-in-law. It was the other way around. Only the dosage was small. Betty is a big woman. That's why she didn't take it. It only went to her head. That's why she's been walking around like a plague lately, and they put her in jail before the trial to save her from Cindy's vengeful family. And some really unbelievable theories. It was their son Jacob who poisoned his wife and arranged everything so that his mother would be suspected. Because still their son loves their Miranda, and Betty was against it. It's not like that at all. Betty was under hypnosis. Here's a cross for you. They put a spell on her, and without her realizing it, they put poison in her soup. And the cap was the first to pay, the thief. And Cindy is alive and well, and will give birth soon. Strange as it may seem, the latter version was the closest to the truth, which was as follows. At the investigation, Betty denied everything, sobbed absolutely everything, wrung her hands, swore and swore that she was not guilty of anything, and had not poisoned her daughter-in-law. I did not buy poison in the mincemeat. and the cat died because Catney Bitch put a spell on him. The investigators frowned, scribbling quickly in their paperwork. Then they gave Betty a lie detector test, put different sensors on her, and made her answer the same questions. The results were staggering. The detector showed that she was telling the pure truth, but now it was nothing at all, because the witnesses' testimonies and the results of the examination of the dumplings and the exhumed cat. It was a clear indication of rat poisoning. But if not Betty, then who had tried to poison Cindy? They kept looking. They sent in another investigator from the regional center. He went to find out everything from the beginning, unraveling the tangle slowly and patiently. Again, he questioned everyone. And of course, Catney. The latter had drunk more blood from the investigator than all the others put together. I'm telling you right off the bat, the devil possessed their horrible cat, and the devil led with an icy hand. Oh, the interrogator spat and drank liters of strong coffee every time after the interrogation, and the crazy granny left. The saleswoman testified at the inquest that she sold the citizen Betty rat poison in the amount of one factory package at the cash register checked. Everything added up. That day only once and bought dye poison. And a biased questioning of the village's neighbors revealed Jacob's long history of association with Miranda, as well as the reason for their parting. That reason is what made her go to town. Obviously, here the investigator, upon reflection, set up a confrontation, a cross-examination, and various other clever investigative actions, in the course of which many of the people involved in the case learned things they didn't know before. Because those things had been carefully concealed. Do you know this citizen? Of course I do. She is the daughter of my high school friend Miranda. Did you know that she was dating your son? Well, of course I knew. Everyone knew. I'm sorry about that. Betty sighed. Were you aware of Miranda's pregnancy? What? The investigator wrote something down in satisfaction and did not say another word. The next day, the interrogation was arranged with other participants. Do you know this citizen? Yes, this is the doctor I always went to in the regional center. Do you know the specialty of this specialist? He seems to be a homeopath. Your specialty is certified psychiatrist. You admit to hypnotizing citizen Betty? Yes, I used techniques, suggestion. And lastly, I questioned Miranda. Do you know this citizen? Yes, Miranda answered reluctantly. The nature of your relationship. That is my own business. I am the only one who has a criminal case here. Please answer the questions asked, or you will be taken into custody and things like that. Finally, after several months of investigation, everything came out as it was. Several years ago, Miranda had gotten Jacob pregnant, but only found out about it after they had already broken up. Because Jacob met Cindy and fell madly in love with her. Miranda has a vengeful nature. She said nothing to him, deciding to leave this trump card for the future, went to town, gave birth to a healthy baby boy, and left him in the maternity hospital. He is currently in an orphanage and documents are being prepared for his adoption by a decent childless couple. Soon Miranda met the doctor and formed a cunning plan. Miranda brought Betty to this doctor, recommending this fine specialist to her for the treatment of recurring headaches. The doctor repeatedly hypnotized Betty, indoctrinating her to dislike her sister-in-law Cindy. And about a year ago, together, they decided to indoctrinate Betty into thinking about killing her outside with a beautiful poison. Then, after Betty, under the influence of suggestion, had committed the crime, Miranda again brought her to the doctor, and he under hypnosis ordered her to forget what had happened. In this way, they hoped to get rid of the rival. Miranda and this psychiatrist had already been in a close relationship. Miranda even lived lately in an apartment belonging to him. Miranda herself dreamed of bringing Jacob back by informing him about a child together, after Cindy would already be dead, and only his majesty of chance and Molly curiosity allowed to avoid the real trouble. After all the ordeal, Betty is finally released from custody. How had she changed? She came home quite different from what she had left. She became quiet and thoughtful, didn't argue with anyone. She turned to religion. She often went to a distant monastery, communed with the Holy Father. She begged forgiveness for her sins, both voluntary and involuntary. Jacob and Cindy had a daughter. They named her Molly in honor of Molly, without whose intervention this little girl would not have been born. Upon learning of all the circumstances during the investigation, the young people took pity on Betty. The next New Year, she received an unexpected gift. Her son and daughter-in-law came to visit and brought their granddaughter. Betty cried, begged Cindy's forgiveness, and even tried to get on her knees, but was not allowed to. Daughter-in-law, what are you? Mama told her, stop it, please. We're family. What's past is past, and it's not your fault. Really? Cindy, not believing her ears, shyly asked Betty. Really, darling, you forgive me, an old sinner. But I don't deserve it. I burst into tears again. Everyone gets what they deserve. Then you deserve to be forgiven. And another granddaughter was comforted by her daughter-in-law. The daughter-in-law and daughter-in-law hugged each other forever, forgetting their former grudges. Miranda and the psychiatrist went to jail for 5 years. They got what they deserved, and Betty lived a quiet life now. Sometimes friends of her husband Michael that he had not repaired the wicked again. After all, her beloved son and his pregnant daughter-in-law were coming to visit her soon. After all, Cindy was expecting a baby again, this time a boy, and Betty was immensely happy about the news.